So what we're going to do now is we're going to have one of our head-to-head talks. First, we're going to have a talk here in Manchester, and then we're going to have hear from you in Istanbul. And then we're going to have a short period of questions. So right now, what I'd like to do is just introduce the two speakers, and then we're going to dive right in. So first up, here in Manchester, we have Simon Marvin, who's a professor at the University of Salford and co-director of the Center for Sustainable Urban and Regional Futures. And then right after him in Istanbul, we're going to have, don't kill me, this is going to start a diplomatic incident with my pronunciation of Turkish names, Ozgur Uckan, who teaches at the Istanbul Bilgi University and also in another MBA program. How did I do, Ozgur? You can tell me later how I did with pronouncing your name. I'm sure it was terrible. Anyway, that's fine. We're going to welcome Simon Marvin to the stage now, and then we'll have our head-to-head.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Hello in Istanbul from Manchester. I'd like to thank the organisers for the invitation to speak at this workshop. And what I'm going to do in the presentation is try to bring in three issues that didn't get mentioned this morning, but I think are actually quite important in thinking about cities and networked infrastructure. And the first of those is the politics of networked infrastructure and how politics is going to change the relationship between cities, networks, and the interrelationship between cities. And I want to say some ways in which we think that's going to change. The second thing that I want to connect to is this notion of unlimited connectivity. And actually, I think I happened to be in Istanbul nearly 2 weeks ago, and had got to Istanbul via Washington and Chicago in an attempt to subvert the ash crisis. And the only way of getting out of America at that stage was either to hire a private Gulfstream, pay $10,000 to United Airlines to fly to Rome, or Turkish Airlines were absolutely excellent and only charged us £650 to get one of the last flights out to Istanbul. Which I think was very revealing about the politics of connectivity and how fragile networks are, and how when the fragility of them is revealed, the differences that people and places, the different ways in which they interconnect through the networks that are left with network collapse. And the third issue that we haven't heard very much about this morning is issues around ecology, which we want to try to bring in an ecological dimension to thinking about cities, connectivity, and how we might think prospectively about how networked infrastructures and the urban agenda are going to change. Now this work, the work I'm going to talk about has been done at the Surf Centre at the University of Salford, and we do pure and applied work around urban knowledge, socio-technical change, climate change. And I want to talk about a set of work that's been done with myself and a colleague, Mike Hodson. And what we've been trying to understand is how large world cities have been responding in a strategic way to issues around climate change, resource security, energy security, food security, and how their response to these ecological pressures and questions interconnects with their economic and territorial agendas. And what I want to briefly take you through is the way in which what we think is happening in there's something quite significant happening to the ecological agenda. If you thought about the sustainable cities debate 20 years ago, it had an ecological, had a political, a democratic agenda around ecological justice, participation, the questions around the control of resources, and an economic agenda. What we think is starting to happen is questions around ecology are becoming critically viewed through an economic and a security lens, which is reshaping the nature of debates about urban sustainability and the future development of cities and their interrelationships through infrastructure with ecological resources, energy, food, water, and wastes. And increasingly, national states see questions around the development of responses to the economic and the credit crisis and the challenge of climate change as being reinterpreted as an economic opportunity. And also, those economic opportunities also interconnect with critical issues around the security of national states and their ability to ensure continued access to infrastructural resources, energy, water, and food. And as a consequence of that, national governments have become much more strategically interested in ecological questions, but primarily through an economic and a political security lens, thus the interest of the military in climate change, energy security. And there's lots of examples of the extension of national states and militaries into ecological questions. Now, the thing that we're particularly interested in is how this interconnects with the urban agenda. And I suppose, as most of you would recognize, cities potentially occupy a critical role in the relationship to energy consumption and the production of carbon emissions. And although the figures are contested, cities may actually, if you think about what a small fraction of the Earth's surface they actually cover, they're responsible for the transformation of phenomenal levels of resources through dense agglomerations of infrastructure networks. They're critical economic and political control centres, and they are potentially responsible for the production of up to 80% of carbon emissions, although again, of human-induced carbon emissions. At the same time, large cities are often represented as being the victims of climate change. The effects are particularly felt in large cities: rising sea levels, droughts, heat island effects, etc. But they're also representing themselves and each other as being critical sites for the development of innovative responses to climate change and resource constraint. The former mayor of London used to talk about the fight against climate change being won or lost in cities. And critically, large cities are now trying to think about the interrelationship between their economic and their ecological agendas together. This is producing some quite interesting responses, some of which we started to hear about this morning. And that is really about the attempts to think about the rebundling together of infrastructure, network ecologies, and urbanism. And there's some examples on the screen of attempts to think of ways in which those sorts of relationships might be redrawn through Dongtang, the world's first ecological city off the coast of Shanghai, Masdar in the United Arab Emirates, and even looking at some of the smaller examples at a smaller scale in the program. There was a runner-up in the Future Everything Award, Amphibious Architecture, a designer's guide to free farming, so urban food. There's a whole set of initiatives and aspirations to try to rethink the relationship between cities, energy, water, and a changed climate. And some of these represent attempts to try to cocoon or to build more secure or autonomous forms of urbanism that can that to some degree attempts to provide its own resources through solar power, water recycling, the use of waste. We were particularly interested in how large world cities have been addressing these questions. And we had an opportunity to undertake a sort of series of projects looking at some of the largest world cities: London, New York, San Francisco, Tokyo, Melbourne, and to do interviews with utilities, environmental groups and cities, looking at the sorts of responses that were being developed at a world city level to this pressure, to these ecological pressures, and how they were combining their economic growth aspirations with the emergence of ecological constraints and limits. And what we found, I'll take you briefly through some of the sorts of issues that we found and the sorts of new socio-technical configurations that these cities are trying to produce. They're working with environmental groups and large business organizations to develop social visions of systemic changes in the organization of infrastructures, of energy, water, waste, and sometimes food, around three critical themes: strategic protection, resilience, and working collectively at the interconnections between large world cities. And just to give you a sense of the sorts of things that are happening, these large cities are investing significant levels of resources in trying to develop the knowledge and expertise to systemically understand how do ecological pressures, resource constraints and climate change affect the vulnerability of their energy, their food, their water systems. And they're doing that, they're trying to localize or metropolitanize an understanding of the implications of energy security, national energy security debates and climate change impacts at an enlarged metropolitan level. And it's making them much more strategically interested, even when they have no formal responsibility, in the configuration of the networked infrastructures that make the cities possible. And some of them were talking to us about the arm ring of infrastructure, and they were using a language, this is particularly in a New York context, of asking questions about, well, which parts of the urban infrastructure and which parts of the city do we protect? And we're facing questions. London was looking at the long-term implications of sea level rises. Who's going to pay for the incredible cost associated with protecting large cities, and which places will be protected and which won't be, or which will be protected first? There was another set of issues that was a little bit more inward-looking, which was about the ways in which large cities were developing capacity and expertise to try to re-internalize infrastructure flows. What they're interested in is how can they reduce reliance on what they perceive to be external, vulnerable infrastructure systems? How can they build greater degrees of energy autonomy or energy independence from national and international infrastructures? To what extent are water supplies secure, long-distance water supplies secure? Can they extract energy from waste systems to, again, reduce the reliance? And there were some really interesting issues emerging about cities, in a sense, trying to withdraw from reliance on national and international infrastructure flows as they sought to re-internalize the production of energy, searching out local water resources. And a number of cities have gone through scenarios where they're asking the question, if water and energy systems fail, this is particularly in San Francisco, can we re-internalize and build capacity to keep the city operating in San Francisco's models for up to 3 months without reliance on external infrastructure? So there's some very interesting ways in which the rescaling of infrastructure is reshaping our notion of unlimited interconnectivity. And the third issue is about these cities are undertaking these sorts of experiments and fixes collaboratively. There's organizations like the C40, which is the largest cities, collaborating in the development of the expertise, the technology, trying to develop joint purchasing to institutionalize these fixes as solutions that can be used in other world city contexts. The argument being that they're trying to bypass the carnival of debate at regional and international and national levels around climate change and develop a response, a systematic response. But also, they're competing with each other as well. There's a race amongst these cities to be the greenest city on the planet and to use these exemplary solutions as a way of demonstrating something about their distinctiveness and their ability to attempt to achieve their economic growth ambitions against a context of carbon regulation and ecological constraint. And in doing so, they're trying to establish themselves as the sites, the innovative sites, that will develop the solutions that enable cities to continue to reproduce themselves in a period of constraint and climate change. But what about the cities that don't have that capacity and don't have that expertise and resources to do that? Do they make do? And what about other sorts of responses, more socially or behaviorally informed responses like the Transition Towns movement? Because a lot of these world city strategies are very narrowly focused around technological solutions. They don't problematize consumption or look significantly at demand management. So just to conclude, what style of urban security are we talking about here? The picture on the left is the nice image that NASA produced representing the world at night with the cities lit up. And one argument could be, is this attempt to bound ecological resources at the metropolitan scale, is it about the development of planetary, indivisible, or collective security? Or, using inspiration from Buckminster Fuller's Dome over Manhattan, is this an attempt by large world cities to create bounded and divisible security as they attempt to ensure they have access to the resources, they protect themselves strategically, and the interconnections between world cities to mean that they can survive and reproduce themselves in a much more uncertain future economic and ecological context? And finally, the last slide, why does this matter? Interestingly, geologists have now agreed amongst themselves that the latest geological period, starting in the early 1800s, should be renamed the Anthropocene, which is a recognition of the multiple physical indicators they can use to point to a different geological period that's really been shaped by global urbanism, industrial systems, and the development of networked infrastructure, including information and communication technologies. The global economic ecological change that this then produces creates a much more uncertain context for cities thinking about how they reproduce themselves economically, socially, and ecologically. Tim Luke, a political scientist, came up with a very nice phrase, the urbanatura, to describe this much more uncertain context in which cities attempt to guarantee their continued reproduction. And what we think this means is that cities then, their capacity and the capability, the forms of knowledge and expertise and the relationships they develop to ensure the security, the resilience of material and infrastructural flows then becomes critical to ensuring their longer-term reproduction. But the question, the societal question is this about bounded, divisible forms of security, or is it about building collective and planetary security for us all? Thanks very much.
Thanks a lot, Simon. That's really great. So now we're going to hand it over very quickly over to you, Istanbul. Ozgur, welcome. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. Hello from Istanbul, and thanks, Simon. It was a very interesting presentation, and it's a very important issue, this urban footprints of ecological issues, etc. And I will talk about disadvantaged communities and network civic participation. I think it's a missing link of rapid urban growth. And first, I will stay a little bit on the urban growth dynamics and global networked economy and the impact on the urban growth. The 21st century, as you know, it goes by the name of urban century. A great part of the planet lives, product and consumes in the cities. And for the first time, the urban population of Earth will outnumber the rural. Indeed, the impression of third world census, the epochal transition are probably occurred. The century goes by another name. It's the age of the networks. The last global economic crisis made a paradigm shift visible. A transformation which is already going on the last 30 years. The paradigm shift from scale economies to capacity economies, industrial production to flexible production, physical power to knowledge power, the nation state to the transnational empire, a unipolar world to multipolar one, decentralized and distributed and all-encompassing network. This paradigm calls the global network capitalism. This is the end of neoliberal paradigm. Some theoreticians like Negri, Hart, Birno, or Fox say that the network phase of the capitalism predicts also its end. that the fall of both the Wall, the Berlin Wall, and the Twin Towers, and the last crisis indicate there is an after to capitalism. The potential future ironically feeds off the network concept. Because of its core, the concept of network capitalism embodies an antagonistic dichotomy. The network topology undermines the foundations of capitalism. The process of capitalism accumulation and profit now depends on cooperations established online, collaborative intangible labor, innovation networks, and the development of knowledge production, access, dissemination, that is to say, to a process of creating surplus value through open, continuous, horizontally coordinated networks. Network means cooperation and sharing, and whereas capitalism is the product of an instrumental reason dominated by competition. Capitalism is founded upon the private ownership of the means of production, while the network undermines ownership by making the means of production accessible. In Christian Fuchs' term, we are living in an interzone in which competition and cooperation coexist in antagonism. On the one hand, information monopolies like Microsoft, Google, the digital divide, precarious knowledge labor, information warfare, electronic surveillance, internet censorship, accumulation of reputation online, cyber hate, commodified virtual communities, disinformation, and the other is digital gift economy, file sharing, free software, open content, Creative Commons, Wikipedia, cyber protests, e-participation, cooperative virtual communities, online citizen journalism. On the one pole of this dichotomy is e-participation and participatory economy. On the other hand is e-domination and economy of scarcity. Dominated by competition logic, transnational information capitalism succeeds in colonizing the concept of collaboration through, for instance, participatory management, teamwork, strategic alliances, and corporate social responsibility. This is a transition stage from a disciplinary society to a society of self-control in the term of Gilles Deleuze. A participatory and self-regulatory information society based upon collaboration is, in Ernst Bloch's words, is a not yet, for now. And what is evident that the day will come when capitalism will not be here. Global network capitalism also transforms urban topology. Self-organizing on global networks, urban economies becomes the most of functional hubs of global economic system. The city mirrors part of global network society by acting as a nodal point in interlinked information and communication configuration. Some predicts that we are going to the neo-renaissance of the city-states after the nation-state extension. Cities establish easier and richer relationships with each other beyond nation-state boundaries. Global dialogue between cities gains greater momentum and it diversifies, and thus new networks are established with a different participatory model. With increasing cooperation, cities become the driving force for the global economy and innovation. Urban technologies interconnects the cities at infrastructure level and transforms the urban ecosystems. Intercity networks become a network topology of organized capital relations, the gateway cities of the network economy. Of course, there is a dark side of that. Cities, especially the gateway cities, with their agglomeration effect, means a spatial clustering of economic activities, industries, households, and public services, leads to various types of economic scales. The relationship between land use, land value patterns, and the morphology of urban grid becomes more and more rent-based. The morphology of grid plays a fundamental role in organization of urban property markets. Relationship between market process and their spatial organizations in the city transforms urban planning into a rent-seeking process. This structure opens way to the gentrification projects as an urban land production tool into the wild. The neglected zones in the central areas are multiplying on purposes. Urban poverty, unemployment, and social exclusion doubling their impacts. Capacity deficiencies in services such as energy, education, healthcare, transportation, sanitation, and physical security is growing. Disadvantaged communities are forced to exile in slums. Urban growth problems are intensifying. The cities become large nodes in global network capitalism, mobility ascending, rapid urban growth, commercialization of public space by rent-based urban agglomeration, infrastructure collapsing. All of this makes urban system unsustainable. As Gustavo Garza said, the exploding cities of the developing world are also weaving extraordinary new urban networks, corridors, and hierarchies. In the Americas, geographers already talk about a Leviathan known as Rio-Sao Paulo Extended Metropolitan Region, which includes the medium-sized cities over the 500-kilometer-long transport axis between Brazil's two largest metropolises, as well as the important industrial area dominated by Campinas, with a current population of 37 million. This embryonic megalopolis is already larger than Tokyo, Yokohama. Likewise, the giant amoeba of Mexico City, already having consumed Toluca, is extending pseudopods that will eventually incorporate much of central Mexico, including the cities Cuernavaca, Puebla, Copata, Pachuca, and Querétaro, into a single megalopolis with a mid-21st century population of approximately 50 million, about 40% of the national total. Garza said that in the cities in 1999. Istanbul is growing in a similar way, devouring nearby towns, disperses settlement regions, industrial zones, and catchment areas, breeding slums and vacant terrains, a huge carcinogen sprawl. On the other side, rural exodus keeps going, considering that Istanbul is the #1 job market in the country. Basic urban services becomes more and more deficient and inaccessible. Environmental issues are alarming. The urban footprint stretches beyond city boundaries. Urban settlements influence and are affected by broader environmental developments. Urban pollution provides the greatest proportion of carbon dioxide emissions. The sharp increase in population, combined with social complexity, results in destabilization of social institutions and potentially societal collapse. Istanbul becomes ungovernable. Governmental crisis is augmenting. More violent becomes social exclusion strategies. Urban services is privatized more and becomes inaccessible to the urban poor. Safe islands are multiplying. Public urban space is commercialized. Poor are losing their voices. According to the report of the State of the World Cities, there will be 1.4 billion persons living in slums by 2020. Poverty in its multiple dimensions of slums and hunger, sanitation and health, education and employment is increasingly a problem facing cities. 66% of Turkey's population live in urban settings, and nearly 18% of those live in slums. We call them gecekonduz. A novel by Latife Tekin, Virgil Christian, Tales from the Garbage Hills, explains why Istanbul's slums are called gecekonduz. It means set up overnight. Apparently, she goes on to describe the Homeric siege, where shanty dwellers rebuilt their homes every night because the authorities tear them down late. A large number of the urban poor have migrated to the cities in the search of jobs. Large percentages of poverty-stricken children work in manufacturing jobs. Unemployment, inefficient education system, unfair access to basic urban services like sanitation, transport, energy, healthcare are the common problems. Ethnic groups of migrants have tended to be self-segregating in urban space, creating ethnic enclaves. Such migration in particular when it involves culturally different populations, leads to humiliation and exclusions, feelings of rejection, or denial of human dignity, all of which foster crime and violence against them. The disadvantaged communities living in slums or in neglected city center zones are the most affected segments. They have no means of participation to the urban governance. They are the missing link in the urban growth problems. Municipalities try to forget these communities, to force them to exile in slums using gentrification projects. These efforts in vain. Obviously, there is no sustainable solution without them. Indeed, local government is about sustaining communities. It is much more than providing services. Services are a constant response to its community needs in a wider context of local democracy and local representation. Resources are limited and demands are competing, so it's critical that local government finds new ways to plan and deliver services so that local democracy is sustainable and able to flourish. Because communities are never static, it stands to reason that local government, as the closest tier of government to people, should also be constantly evolving to meet changing community needs. The core components of a sustainable community, we can position like that, is a social cohesion, a socially mixed community where neighborhoods are characterized by diversity of income, age, culture, and housing tenure, etc. And there is opportunities of move freely through life cycles without the need to relocate. And a functional economy, dispersed employment opportunities exist which underpin a quality of life matched with community prosperity expectations. A robust environment, ecologically balanced with impacts from the human activity, capable of being accommodated without degradation. A sound infrastructure means facilities and services are matched to community needs. There is no other way to manage urban growth problems without the active participation of all parts, including especially disadvantaged communities. As the European Charter on Local Governance highlights, local democratic governance and decentralization is an enabling framework to fight against poverty and inequities to achieve the Millennium Development Goals and for the respect of human rights, including economic, social, and cultural rights. Democratic local governance, by involving all the concerned actors in the elaboration, implementation, and evaluation of local policies, encourages a development responsive to population's rights and demands, notably to the most vulnerable groups. The city should become a human rights city. As Shulamit Koenig states, imagine living in a society where all citizens have made a pledge to overcome fear and impoverishment, to build a society that provides human security, access to food, clean water, housing, education, healthcare, and work at livable wages, and to share available resources with all citizens. It is not as a gift, but as a realization of human rights. That is what human rights cities do by providing an energetic space that demonstrates that living in such society is possible. Urban governance needs citizens who are willing to able to move into public space and to participate in definition and implementation of the common goods. Local government models are forcefully changing. The paradigm change occurs in three interrelated areas: governance, urban economy, and urban technologies. If it is synchronized properly, governance, economy, and technology transform cities fast into inhabitable, sustainable ecosystems. Urban governments become networking. Networks show their destabilizing and antagonistic effect on capitalism, not only globally, but also locally. Network effect is more powerful at the local state. Network is sharing. Only the access, sharing, and usage of the information creates value. The network precludes the very concept of the center. The network management is based on horizontal coordination. Otherwise, it becomes ungovernable. Cooperation possibilities escaping from the colonization of competition logic are floating on networks as temporary autonomous zones. resistance to capitalist organization of urban network is rising both on the streets and on the networks. Especially against gentrification projects, there is a significant resistance in Istanbul. The disadvantaged communities use more and more networks. They realize the new collaboration tools based on ICT and the civic participation networks could give them a voice, transform them into communities of practice, empower them to participate to the urban governance, and enhance the social cohesion. There is some examples of in Istanbul, the networked communities, Sulukule community. It's a district of Roman district near to city center. They use very well the social networks and websites to inform, to spread information and to organize between themselves. Another one is Ümraniye community. It calls Çınardibi Cultural Center. Another one, Istanbul Gay and Lesbian Community, Urbanism Movement for Society, Housing Right Coordination, Urban Ecology Movements, Citizen Journalism, etc. Thank you very much, and bye-bye from Istanbul.
Okay, so thank you very much. That was fantastic. Now we move into one of our audience question sessions. So if I could ask people who do have any questions in all of the 3 cities now to make your way down here to the microphone, and if we can have cameras on those. I can see no questions yet in Manchester. And I think we have one in Istanbul, I think. So let's go to Istanbul. Can we have a question from Istanbul, please?
Yeah, hello. Hello. Is there a question from the audience? Oh yeah, I do have a question, but I mean, I didn't know if the audience had a question. Mine is not so much a question as maybe a series of thoughts that these talks provoked. As far as ecology is concerned, I was reminded of a sort of a witty remark made by the philosopher Slavoj Žižek about the relationship between ecology and capitalism, where he says that in today's world it has become easier to imagine the end of the world because of an ecological catastrophe than imagining the end of capitalism. I find it worth thinking about. And as far as urban growth, disadvantaged communities, and the role of networks, one pertinent issue that comes to mind is ownership. Ownership of the means of communication, because networks depend on channels of communication, and who owns these channels is very much a bone of contention in today's capitalist world. So these are not so much questions. I'm sure questions could be maybe formed out of these thoughts. Maybe one question about the means of communication could be what alternative forms of ownership.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's it for the moment, as far as we're concerned. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you want to take up the issue.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you are right. It's a big question, but also the more and more these channels dispersed and with a democratic potentialities in it, and the broadband issues, and it comes more and more accessible. But also, of course, there's a huge digital divide in Turkey, not only in Turkey, but even in Istanbul, between the slums and the city center, etc. But also, they are probably more this why I use the temporary autonomous zone concept. There is some little groups organizing and get access to the networks, and also they organize the other people to use the networks, and it can be a very effective, it's an effective use, I think. Yeah.
Can I just intervene? We've got a question in Manchester, I believe. So can we, if you don't mind, hand over for a question from the audience in Manchester?
Hi, I'm Evelyn. Yeah, I really liked that you said also that governments need people to participate in public space. And I think a problem that a lot of people run into when doing like community projects is getting people involved. And do you have any idea of how to encourage people more to participate in public space?
Sure. In local level, the governance is more and more and potentially more effective than the national level. But also the municipality should show this willingness to enhance the participation. I think with this rent-based process, it's urban agglomeration effects, the urban land use, etc., the municipalities here in Istanbul are not really decided to enhance and facilitate the participation, especially of the disadvantaged communities. Why I propose more and democratic force and forceful participation by the networks, by the media, especially in the media, to meet the community's needs with the municipalities' plans. And I think we have to force them to that.
Okay. Okay, and thank you very much. And we have one more question, I think, from Manchester.
Yeah, my question is about how a city could possibly network itself in such a way to avoid falling a victim of that global urban agglomeration you talked about.
Did you hear that question okay?
Please repeat your question.
How can a city use constructively the networks it's got, but at the same time place itself in such a way to avoid being part of the global urban agglomeration? Yeah,
sure. The urban agglomeration effect, it's and urban clustering strategies, especially with the creative industries, is very important for the cities, indeed. Then also the global urban network is very important, the brand value of the city, etc. But we have to plan this agglomeration effect in a meaningful way with the community needs and with the historical preservations and a lot of things. No, of course, urban ecosystem.
Can you show the audience?
If you just prioritize this agglomeration impact, it's not a sustainable way, and it's not only even the disadvantaged communities impact, but also the urban ecosystem is just blessed by this unmeaningful planning process, the rent-based process. I think what I can say that. Thanks.
Fantastic. So thank you very much.